Imagine a war that spanned nearly 2 centuries, involving kings, knights, and commoners who traveled thousands of miles to fight for control of the most sacred land on earth. But the Crusades were far more than simple wars for territory. They were struggles driven by faith, politics, and the promise of eternal salvation. These conflicts forever changed Europe and the Middle East, and their consequences are still being felt today in ways you might not expect. And here's something to keep you on the edge of your seat. By the end of this video, we'll reveal how a single, legendary object from the Crusader era still influences politics and religion today. You won't want to miss it. Welcome to Armchair Archaeology. Let's dive into the epic story of the Crusades. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Armchair Archaeology for more captivating journeys into history. Now, let's uncover the origins of the Crusades. To understand why the Crusades began, we need to look at the religious and political landscape of the late 11th century. At the time, Europe was deeply religious, and Jerusalem, under Muslim control, was seen as the ultimate prize for Christian Europe. For centuries, Christian pilgrims had traveled to the Holy Land, despite facing great danger along the way. By the 1070s, however, access to Jerusalem was growing more perilous as the Seljuk Turks gained control over much of Anatolia, threatening Christian Byzantium and restricting pilgrim routes. The Seljuk Turks were a powerful Muslim dynasty that had rapidly expanded their empire, taking control of key regions including Persia, Iraq, and much of modern-day Turkey. Their victory over Byzantine forces at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071 left the Byzantine Empire severely weakened, increasing the pressure on Christian territories and pilgrim routes to Jerusalem. In 1095, Byzantine Emperor Alexios I sent an urgent plea to Pope Urban II for military aid, warning of the growing Muslim threat and requesting support to defend Christian lands. Pope Urban saw this as more than just a chance to help Byzantium. It was an opportunity to unite Europe's often warring Christian kingdoms under a common cause, reclaiming Jerusalem for Christendom. At the Council of Clermont, Urban delivered a rousing speech that ignited fervor across Europe. He promised salvation and eternal glory to all who would take up the cross and fight in the Holy Land, absolving them of their sins. This idea of crusade, a holy war fought in the name of Christ, struck a powerful chord with Europe's nobility and commoners alike. Thousands of knights, nobles, and peasants pledged themselves to the cause, setting in motion the First Crusade. Thus, in the name of religion and redemption, the stage was set for one of the most significant and bloody conflicts in medieval history, one that would shape the future of Europe and the Middle East. The First Crusade was a massive mobilization of Christian Europe, with tens of thousands of crusaders setting out from their homes in 1096. It was unlike anything seen before, an unprecedented mix of knights, nobles, and commoners, men, women, and children, marching thousands of miles to the Holy Land, driven by faith and the promise of absolution. Despite their religious zeal, the journey was fraught with danger. The Crusaders faced harsh conditions, including starvation, disease, and attacks from hostile forces along the way. Despite these hardships, the Crusaders achieved remarkable military success. In 1097, they captured the city of Nicaea from the Seljuk Turks, and after a long and brutal siege, they took Antioch in 1098. The ultimate prize, however, was Jerusalem. In July 1099, after a weeks-long siege, the Crusaders breached Jerusalem's defenses. The conquest was swift and devastating. Overwhelmed by religious fervor, the Crusaders massacred thousands of Muslim and Jewish inhabitants, men, women, and children alike, in an event that shocked even some of the Crusaders themselves. The streets ran red with blood, and the human toll on both sides was staggering. Survivors of the slaughter would carry the trauma of that day for generations. Following their victory, the Crusaders established several states in the Levant, including the Kingdom of Jerusalem and the Principality of Antioch. But as these Christian settlers took root in the Holy Land, they weren't just imposing their culture, they were also shaped by the world around them. Crusaders who stayed in the Levant adopted local customs, clothing, and even architecture. The fusion of Eastern and Western traditions in these new territories created a unique cultural blend that would leave its mark on both sides of the conflict. Long after the Crusades ended, these new territories were intended to solidify Christian control over the Holy Land, but they faced constant threats from surrounding Muslim powers. While the First Crusade was a stunning military success, it came at a high price, both in human lives and the future of Christian-Muslim relations. The brutality of the Crusaders' actions would linger in the collective memory of the Muslim world for centuries, creating a divide that seemed impossible to bridge. What started as a holy war for Jerusalem had now set the stage for centuries of bloodshed and mistrust. The brutal conquest of Jerusalem set the tone for centuries of conflict between these two civilizations. After the First Crusade, the Crusaders established several states in the Levant, including the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the County of Edessa, and the Principality of Antioch. These states, while viewed as significant victories for Christian Europe, were fragile and constantly under threat from their Muslim neighbors. The Crusader states were little more than isolated outposts in a sea of Muslim-controlled territories, and they faced near-constant warfare. Despite their victories, the Crusader states were isolated and constantly under attack. Could they have survived longer with stronger alliances? Share your thoughts below. Internally, these new territories were difficult to govern. The rulers were primarily European knights, but they were responsible for a diverse population of Christians, Muslims, and Jews, each with their own customs and languages. This cultural diversity made governance challenging and led to frequent internal divisions. Despite their strong fortifications and military orders, such as the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller, the Crusaders were constantly on the defensive. The Crusader states also faced the problem of resources. They relied heavily on continued military and financial support from Europe, as they lacked the manpower to defend their territories independently. Crusader leaders often returned to Europe to gather reinforcements and supplies, but these efforts were slow and costly. This dependency on European aid would become a major weakness for the Crusader states over time. The Crusaders' most pressing challenge, however, was the growing strength of their Muslim adversaries. By the mid-12th century, the Muslims had begun to mount effective counterattacks, culminating in the fall of Edessa in 1144, a major blow that would prompt the call for the Second Crusade. The fall of Edessa in 1144, one of the most important Crusader strongholds, was a devastating loss for Christian Europe. Edessa's collapse shattered the illusion that the Crusader states were secure, and it exposed the vulnerability of Christian territories in the Levant. In response, Pope Eugene III called for a new crusade to recapture Edessa and restore Christian dominance in the region. This would become the Second Crusade, led by two of Europe's most powerful monarchs, King Louis VII of France and Emperor Conrad III of Germany. From the start, the Second Crusade was plagued by poor planning and disunity. The Crusader armies faced significant challenges on their journey, including hostile terrain and ambushes as they passed through Byzantine territory. Disease and hunger also took their toll, and many Crusaders died before even reaching the Holy Land. When the armies of Louis and Conrad finally arrived, Their efforts to reclaim lost territory met with failure. The most significant defeat occurred at Damascus. The Crusaders attempted to besiege the city, hoping to deal a major blow to Muslim power in the region, but they were forced to retreat after a series of failed assaults. In the end, the Second Crusade was a complete failure. Not only did it fail to achieve any of its objectives, but it left the Crusader states weaker than ever before. The failure of the Second Crusade dealt a serious blow to Christian morale and further weakened their hold on the Holy Land. Meanwhile, Muslim forces continued to grow in strength, preparing for the next phase of the conflict. The disunity and failures of the Crusaders gave rise to one of the most iconic figures in the Crusades, Saladin. Born in Tikrit, Saladin rose to prominence in the 1170s as a military leader and political figure, eventually uniting the fractured Muslim world under his rule. Saladin's leadership was marked by his ability to bring together the various Muslim factions of Egypt, Syria, and other regions into a cohesive force. His ultimate goal was to reclaim Jerusalem, the city lost to the Crusaders nearly a century earlier. Saladin's first major triumph came in 1187 at the Battle of Hattin. With his forces expertly positioned, Saladin's army dealt a devastating blow to the Crusaders, capturing or killing much of their leadership. This victory not only shattered the Crusader army, but left Jerusalem defenseless. Saladin soon marched on the Holy City, which fell to his forces after a short siege. Saladin's character went beyond his tactical genius. He was known for his wisdom and generosity, qualities that were as important to his leadership as his battlefield victories. When Saladin recaptured Jerusalem in 1187, he famously refused to exact revenge for the massacre carried out by the Crusaders nearly a century earlier. Instead, he granted safe passage to the Christian inhabitants of the city, a gesture of mercy that earned him respect across both Muslim and Christian worlds. Even Richard the Lionheart, his fiercest rival, is said to have admired Saladin's noble spirit. Saladin showed mercy where the Crusaders had been ruthless. Was his approach key to winning the war for hearts and minds? Let us know what you think in the comments. The recapture of Jerusalem was a pivotal moment in the Crusades, galvanizing Europe into action and setting the stage for the Third Crusade. Saladin's ability to unite the Muslim world and defeat the Crusaders at Hattin solidified his legacy as one of the greatest military leaders in history. His victories dramatically shifted the balance of power in the region, making the future of the Crusader states increasingly uncertain. The fall of Jerusalem to Saladin in 1187 shocked Christian Europe, sparking calls for a new crusade to reclaim the Holy City. The Third Crusade was launched in 1189, and some of Europe's most famous leaders took up the cross, including King Richard, the Lionheart of England, King Philip II of France, and Emperor Frederick Barbarossa of the Holy Roman Empire. However, Frederick tragically drowned en route to the Holy Land, leaving Richard and Philip to lead the Crusader forces. Richard the Lionheart quickly became the central figure of the Third Crusade. Despite suffering from illness, Richard refused to stay off the battlefield, leading his troops with unwavering determination. His resilience became legendary as he fought from the front lines, sometimes even on a stretcher, securing several important victories, including the recapture of the strategic port city of Acre in 1191. This victory was crucial in re-establishing a Christian presence in the region. Richard's leadership earned him the respect of both his soldiers and his enemies, with even Muslim chroniclers admiring his courage. The highlight of the Third Crusade was the epic confrontation between Richard and Saladin. While Richard managed to win several key battles, he ultimately could not reclaim Jerusalem. After months of stalemate, Richard and Saladin negotiated a truce in 1192. The Treaty of Jaffa, signed that year, allowed Christian pilgrims to visit Jerusalem without interference. Though the city remained under Muslim control, it effectively ended hostilities between the two sides, establishing a 3-year truce and ensuring that both Christian and Muslim forces would maintain peace over the territories. While it fell short of recapturing Jerusalem, the treaty provided some relief for European Christians and restored a fragile coexistence in the region. Although the Third Crusade failed to achieve its ultimate goal of recapturing Jerusalem, it restored some Christian strongholds in the region and strengthened European influence in the Levant. Richard's legendary rivalry with Saladin, marked by mutual respect, became one of the most iconic narratives of the Crusades. Though a full victory was elusive, the Third Crusade reinforced European involvement in the Holy Land and exemplified the complex interplay of war, diplomacy, and faith during the Crusades. After the Third Crusade, Christian Europe launched several more expeditions to the Holy Land, but the later Crusades were increasingly disorganized and marked by diminishing returns. The Fourth Crusade, 1202 to 1204, is perhaps the most infamous of these. Instead of heading to Jerusalem, the Crusaders were diverted to Constantinople, the Christian capital of the Byzantine Empire. In 1204, they sacked the city, looting its treasures and deepening the divide between the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches. The Crusaders turned on their own, sacking Constantinople. Was this betrayal the moment the Crusades lost their way? Comment below. This betrayal severely weakened the Byzantine Empire, an act that would haunt Christian unity for centuries. Subsequent Crusades, including the 5th, 1217-1221, and 6th, 1228-1229, aimed to attack Muslim power indirectly by targeting Egypt, which was seen as the key to controlling the Levant. The Fifth Crusade failed due to poor planning and leadership, while the Sixth, led by Emperor Frederick II, achieved a brief diplomatic success. Frederick negotiated the return of Jerusalem through diplomacy in 1249, though this control was short-lived. The Seventh and Eighth Crusades, both led by King Louis IX of France, also failed to regain significant ground in the Holy Land. Louis's campaigns focused again on Egypt, but ended in disaster, with Louis himself captured during the Seventh Crusade. The final blow came with the fall of Acre in 1291, when Muslim forces recaptured the last major Crusader stronghold in the Levant, effectively ending Christian control of the region. With the fall of Acre, the Crusader presence in the Holy Land ended, marking the close of an era. Yet, the echoes of these campaigns would continue to shape both European and Middle Eastern history for centuries to come. The later Crusades, while costly in resources and lives, achieved little in terms of lasting victories. By the end of the 13th century, European interest in launching new crusades had waned, and the focus shifted to other internal and external conflicts, bringing the crusading era to a close. While the Crusades failed to permanently secure the Holy Land for Christian Europe, they had profound and far-reaching consequences across the continent. Economically, the Crusades opened up new trade routes between Europe and the East, introducing luxury goods like spices, silk, and precious metals to European markets. The increased contact with the Islamic world also facilitated the exchange of ideas, including advancements in science, medicine, and mathematics, many of which had been preserved by Muslim scholars. This transmission of knowledge helped spark the intellectual revival that would lead to the Renaissance. Politically, the Crusades contributed to the rise of stronger centralized monarchies. Many European nobles who joined the Crusades left their lands under the control of the monarchy, leading to the increased power of kings, especially in England and France. The Crusades also helped to erode the feudal system, as wealth and land became concentrated in fewer hands. The Church, too, gained considerable influence during the Crusades. The papacy asserted its authority, leading and coordinating these massive campaigns, but this also came with criticism. The sacking of Constantinople by Crusaders during the Fourth Crusade, for example, damaged the Church's moral authority, deepening divisions between Eastern and Western Christianity. Military orders, like the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller, gained wealth and power, but their fortunes would change in the coming centuries. The Knights Templar, in particular, would eventually be dissolved under controversial circumstances. The Crusades also left an indelible mark on European culture, reinforcing a sense of Christian identity and holy war. These cultural and political shifts would shape the future of Europe for centuries. The Crusades had a lasting impact on the Middle East as well. Initially, Muslim leaders were caught off guard by the strength and ferocity of the First Crusade, but over time, leaders like Saladin successfully united Muslim factions and launched successful counterattacks. By the end of the Crusades, Muslim forces had reclaimed all of the territory the Crusaders had taken. One of the most significant effects of the Crusades in the Middle East was the unification of Muslim forces, particularly under the Ayyubid and later the Mamluk dynasties. This unity allowed the Muslim world to defend its lands and push the Crusaders out of the region for good by 1291. However, the memory of the Crusades also had a lasting psychological impact. For many in the Muslim world, the Crusades were seen as a series of aggressive invasions by Christian forces. The brutality of these invasions, especially the mass killings in Jerusalem during the First Crusade, left a deep scar on the region's collective memory. This perception helped reinforce the concept of jihad, or holy struggle against foreign invaders. In Islamic tradition, jihad refers to a range of efforts from personal spiritual battles to physical combat in defense of Islam. In the context of the Crusades, jihad became a rallying cry for Muslim forces defending their lands, a concept that would resonate in Islamic thought for centuries. The Crusades also influenced the political landscape of the Middle East. Many of the fortified cities and castles built by the Crusaders, such as Cractus Chevalier and the citadel of Saladin, continued to be used long after the Crusaders had departed, becoming part of the region's military infrastructure. Even today, the memory of the Crusades continues to shape how many people in the Middle East view Western intervention. Even today, the word Crusader is invoked in political rhetoric to symbolize Western influence in the Middle East, reflecting the centuries-old history of conflict between the Christian world and the Muslim East. The legacy of the Crusades is a complex and contentious one, viewed differently depending on where you look. In Western Europe, the Crusades were often romanticized, especially during the 19th century. The image of chivalrous knights, gallant kings, and heroic battles against Muslim forces became part of popular culture, immortalized in literature, art, and even modern films. This glorified view, however, glossed over the darker sides of the Crusades, massacres, religious intolerance, and the economic motivations behind them. Modern historians have taken a more balanced approach, recognizing the Crusades as complex conflicts driven by a mixture of religious, political, and economic factors. While the idea of a holy war was a central motivator, the ambitions of kings, nobles, and the papacy played just as important a role. Moreover, the Crusades led to brutal warfare, where civilians were often caught in the crossfire, and entire cities were sacked in the name of God. In the Middle East, the memory of the Crusades is far less romanticized. For many, they represent a period of foreign invasion, brutality, and and occupation. The term Crusader remains deeply charged, frequently appearing in modern political discussions to denote Western involvement in the Middle East. This enduring sentiment highlights the profound and lasting effects of the Crusades on Christian-Muslim relations, with echoes that still resonate in contemporary geopolitics. The contrasting ways in which the Crusades are remembered in the West and the Middle East highlight the complex nature of historical memory. While some view the Crusades as a time of heroic deeds, others see them as a tragic period of violence and oppression. As we've explored, the Crusades were a multifaceted series of wars that shaped both the European and Middle Eastern worlds in profound ways. From the rise of legendary figures like Richard the Lionheart and Saladin to the cultural exchanges that helped spark the Renaissance, the impact of the Crusades resonates even today. They left behind a legacy of both heroism and tragedy, influencing religious and political relations for centuries to come. And now, as promised, here's the fun fact you've been waiting for. One of the most iconic relics from the Crusader era is the True Cross, a piece of wood believed to be from the cross on which Christ was crucified. The Crusaders carried it into battle as a holy symbol. However, after Saladin's victory at the Battle of Hattin in 1187, the True Cross was lost, and its whereabouts remain a mystery to this day. Some fragments are believed to exist in churches around the world, and debates over its authenticity continue. Thank you for joining us on this fascinating journey through the Crusades. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Armchair Archaeology for more explorations of the past. Hit the notification bell to stay updated on our next historical adventure. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What ancient conflicts or civilizations should we explore next? Let us know in the comments below. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the flame of curiosity burning bright.